Have you ever looked out of your window at night and felt like something was looking back at you? Not just the vague feeling of being watched, but something real, something there in the darkness, staring straight into your home? I never thought much of it before, but that was before the night it happened to me. It started last fall. I had just moved into an old house in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't anything special, but it had a certain charm to it. Tall ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and big windows that looked out onto a small, overgrown yard. The previous owners had been an elderly couple, but they'd moved into a retirement home, leaving the house vacant for a few months before I took over the lease. It was peaceful, secluded, and exactly what I needed after a stressful year. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent most of my time settling in, getting used to the quirks of the house. The wind would rattle the windows at night, and the floorboards creaked constantly, but it felt normal for a house as old as this one. I liked the quiet, the sense of isolation. It was perfect for me, or so I thought. One night, about a month after I'd moved in, something strange happened. I had been watching TV in the living room, the dim light from the screen casting long shadows across the room. It was getting late, so I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV, flicked off the lights, and headed upstairs to my bedroom. As I reached the top of the stairs, something caught my eye. The window at the end of the hallway had a view of the backyard, but that wasn't what drew my attention. It was the reflection in the glass. For a split second, I thought I saw something, a shadow, a figure maybe, standing just outside the window looking in. I froze, my heart racing. I stared at the window, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, but the yard was empty. Just the usual overgrown bushes and the tree, swaying in the wind. I shook it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. After all, it had been a long day. I went to bed, trying not to think about it. But that night, I had the first nightmare. In the dream, I was lying in bed, unable to move. The room was dark, but I could hear something breathing, slow and heavy. I tried to turn my head to see where the sound was coming from, but my body wouldn't respond. The breathing grew louder, closer, until I could feel it right next to me. And then, in the dream, I turned my head, and there it was. A face. Pale, lifeless, with hollow eyes staring down at me. I woke up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. It took me a few minutes to shake off the terror, to convince myself it was just a dream, but even then I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The room felt colder, heavier, like the air itself had thickened. The next day, I tried to push the nightmare out of my mind. I told myself it was just stress, or maybe something I'd eaten before bed. But as the week went on, things started to get. Every night, I would hear noises. At first, it was just the usual creaks and groans of the house settling, but then I started hearing something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I would get up, check the hallway, but there was never anyone there. The house was empty. Then came the scratching. It started one night around 2. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep when I heard it. A faint scratching sound, like nails against wood. At first, I thought it was coming from the attic. Maybe a raccoon or some other animal had gotten in, but when I listened closer, I realized it wasn't coming from the attic. It was coming from the walls. I got up, searching the house, but I couldn't find the source of the sound. It seemed to follow me, moving through the wall as I walked down the hallway. Every time I thought I was getting closer to it, it would stop, leaving me standing there in the dark, heart pounding. This went on for days. The scratching, the footsteps, the feeling of being watched. It all built up until one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had gone to bed early, hoping to get some sleep, but as soon as I turned off the lights, the noises started again. This time, they were louder, more insistent. The footsteps were heavier, the scratching more frantic. I could hear it all around me, like something was crawling through the walls, trying to get in. And then I heard a knock. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it came from the window. I froze, listening, hoping it was just my imagination. But the knock came again, louder this time, more deliberate. I got out of bed, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I walked over to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the window, I hesitated. Something told me not to look, not to open the curtains. But I had to know. I pulled the curtains aside, and there, standing just outside the window, was a figure. It was tall, its face hidden in the shadows, but I could see its eyes, dark, hollow eyes staring straight at me. I stumbled back, dropping my phone in the process. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It just stood there watching me. I scrambled for the phone, my hands shaking as I fumbled to turn off the flashlight. The room plunged into darkness, but I could still feel it there, outside the window, staring in. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place. But eventually, the figure moved. It turned slowly and disappeared into the darkness of the yard. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called a contractor to come check the house, convinced there was something wrong with the wiring, or maybe I was just hearing things because of the wind or old pipes. But he found nothing. No animals in the attic, no problems with the house. Everything was normal. But I knew it wasn't. For the next few days, I kept all the curtains closed, trying to pretend that everything was fine. But the noises didn't stop. The footsteps, the scratching, the knocking at the window. It all got worse. One night, after another sleepless night, I decided to leave the house. I packed a bag, planning to stay at a friend's place for a few days. As I was getting ready to leave, I heard the knock again. This time, it wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the front door. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the door, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to open it. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know who or what was knocking. I opened the door, and there it was. The figure. It stood on the porch, its face still hidden in shadow, its dark eyes staring at me. But this time, it spoke. "Let me in." Its voice was low, almost a whisper, but it sent a chill down my spine. I didn't move, didn't say anything. I just stood there staring at it. "Let me in," it repeated, more insistent this time. I shook my head, my throat dry. No. For a moment, the figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me with those hollow eyes. Then, slowly, it turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and left the house. I haven't been back since. It's been months now, and the house still sits there, empty. I've thought about going back, about trying to figure out what happened, but something keeps me away. Every time I think about the house, about those nights, I feel a deep sense of dread. I know that whatever was in that house, whatever was watching me, it's still there, waiting. And I'm afraid that one day it will find me again.